It was the third week after moving into their dream home on Cedar Maple Lane, a quiet cul-de-sac where lawns looked like golf courses, and the neighbors waved just a little too long. Jacob and Emily Matthews had spent months searching for the perfect property, a single-story ranch with a wraparound porch, enough room for their golden retriever to roam, and best of all, no mandatory homeowners association. That was a deal-breaker for Emily. She'd heard enough horror stories about power-hungry board members dictating the color of mailboxes and measuring grass with rulers. But just as they finished unpacking the last box, there came an unexpected knock on the door. On the other side stood Karen Whitmore, coal with blonde hair, pressed pastel suit, and a clipboard clutched like a weapon. She had the kind of smile that was less friendly and more of a warning shot. Karen introduced herself as President of the Neighborhood Association, a title that rolled off her tongue like it was ordained rather than elected. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. In rapid succession, she listed the association's guidelines, gesturing at the porch railing, the trash bin placement, and even the welcome mat as if each one was a potential violation. Then she handed Jacob a packet of paperwork, a membership form for the HOA, along with a note about the $250 initiation fee. The way Karen spoke, it sounded less like an invitation and more like a summons. Emily listened carefully, arms crossed, and politely declined. They bought the house specifically because it was outside the HOA's jurisdiction. The real estate agent had confirmed that point multiple times. But Karen was undeterred. She insisted there had been a misunderstanding, claiming that Cedar Maple Lane was a deed-restricted community and that everyone needed to be on the same page. The conversation ended civilly enough, but as Karen walked down the driveway, she shot a glance over her shoulder, the kind of glance that promised this wasn't over. Within days, small things began happening. Their trash came mysteriously tipped over on pickup mornings. A friendly reminder note appeared under their doormat, and signed but printed on HOA letterhead, warning that noncompliance would lead to further action. Neighbors who had smiled warmly on move-in day suddenly avoided eye contact. Jacob shrugged it off, but Emily wasn't so quick to dismiss it. She'd dealt with people like Karen before, people who thought rules were weapons and authority was a personal hobby. She wasn't about to sign anything just to keep the peace. What Karen didn't know, what no one on Cedar Maple Lane knew, was that Emily wasn't just someone who hated HOA drama. She was a county sheriff, sworn to enforce the law, not Karen's interpretation of it. The tension reached its peak one humid Thursday evening. As Emily watered the hydrangeas, Karen pulled up in her pearl-white SUV and parked half on the curb. She marched up the driveway with her clipboard again, this time less pleasant and far more insistent. She accused the Matthews of refusing to cooperate and hinted at serious consequences. Emily calmly repeated what she'd said before. Their property wasn't part of any HOA, and they had no intention of joining. Karen didn't take that well. Her face flushed crimson as she muttered something about calling the authorities. Emily almost laughed at the irony, but she kept quiet, knowing full well how this would end. Sure enough, just 2 nights later, Jacob and Emily were finishing dinner when a flash of red and blue lights filled their living room windows. Someone had called the police to report disturbances and suspicious activity at their address. As they stepped outside to meet the responding officers, they saw Karen standing at the end of the driveway, arms folded, smirking like a chess player who thought she'd just declared checkmate. But Karen didn't know the game she'd started, and she had no idea who she was playing against. The patrol car's headlights washed over the Matthews driveway, scattering across the freshly paved asphalt. Emily stepped forward calmly, still wearing her sheriff's badge on her belt out of habit. Though hidden under her untucked shirt, she recognized the 2 responding deputies immediately. They were from her own department, younger officers she'd mentored during field training. The look on their faces when they saw her standing there was priceless, a mix of surprise, confusion, and immediate respect. Karen's smirk faltered the moment the deputies greeted Emily by name, calling her Sheriff Matthews. It was as if someone had yanked the rug out from under her. She tried to cover her shock by launching into a theatrical explanation of how these new neighbors were refusing to follow neighborhood rules, creating disturbances, and potentially endangering property values. The deputies listened politely but exchanged quick glances. They knew something Karen didn't. The house Emily and Jacob purchased wasn't under any HOA jurisdiction. That had been settled years ago in a zoning decision the county kept on file. The lot Karen was so obsessed with was deliberately excluded from the association after a prior legal dispute with the original developer. Emily didn't interrupt. She let Karen talk herself into a corner, stacking complaint on top of complaint, each one sounding more trivial than the last. When Karen finished her breathless speech, Emily simply produced her ID, flipping it open under the patrol car's headlights. The deputies immediately shifted their tone. This wasn't going to go the way Karen expected. Instead of demanding compliance, the officers began asking Karen questions. Had she been harassing the Matthews? Did she know this property was outside her HOA's control? Had she, by any chance, been leaving anonymous notes or trespassing? Karen stammered, tried to steer the conversation back to her scripted complaints, but the momentum had already changed. Word spread quickly around Cedar Maple Lane. By the next morning, the entire cul-de-sac knew that Emily Matthews was a county sheriff, and Karen's late-night stunt had backfired. The Matthews received apologetic nods from neighbors walking their dogs, people who had clearly been avoiding eye contact days before. Some of them whispered, "Good for you," as they passed, careful not to be seen by Karen's watchful eyes. But if Karen felt embarrassed, she didn't show it. Instead, she doubled down. A few days later, Emily found an envelope taped to a mailbox with bold letters scrawled across the front. Final notice. Inside was another HOA warning, now threatening legal escalation if they refused to join. Jacob laughed out loud at the absurdity, but Emily didn't find it funny. Karen wasn't just stubborn, she was becoming reckless. Then came the flyers. Overnight, printed papers appeared in mailboxes around the neighborhood, accusing the Matthews of being uncooperative and endangering community harmony. They were signed by concerned neighbors, but everyone knew whose printer they came from. What Karen didn't realize was that she'd crossed a line, not just with the Matthews, but with the law. Harassment, defamation, trespassing. Each of these was something Emily could act on. But Emily had spent her career understanding when to use authority and when to use patience. Rather than confront Karen outright, she decided to let her keep digging her own hole. The tension built until one sweltering afternoon, when Karen showed up again, this time with two other HOA board members in tow. They stood in the Matthews yard, shouting about mandatory membership and community standards loud enough for the whole block to hear. That was the moment Emily realized this wasn't just an overzealous neighbor. This was someone on a personal crusade. Someone who believed rules only apply to other people. Emily had stayed patient long enough. Now it was time to put an end to Karen's games. By the following week, Karen's campaign had spiraled into full-blown obsession. Her clipboard was now joined by a binder thick with printed evidence. Photographs of the Matthews mailbox, their driveway, even their backyard taken from the sidewalk, as if she were building a criminal case. She left voice messages on Jacob's phone at odd hours, sometimes at midnight, demanding they sign the agreement before it was too late. Emily documented everything. Every note, every flyer, every late-night call went into a folder. As sheriff, she knew how harassment cases were built, and she was letting Karen supply every piece of ammunition herself. Things came to a head on a quiet Saturday morning. Emily was sipping her coffee on the porch when Karen stormed up the driveway, this time furious rather than smug. She waved her binder like a flag and announced loudly for everyone to hear that the Matthews were officially in violation of HOA law, a phrase so absurd Emily almost laughed. Jacob stood beside her, arms folded, silently daring Karen to keep going. Within minutes, the same two deputies who had responded earlier arrived again. This time they weren't here because Karen had called them. They were here because Emily had. She'd reached her limit. She handed them the neatly organized folder of harassment evidence, while Karen sputtered about community standards and property values. The deputies didn't hesitate. They turned their attention on Karen, warning her about trespassing, defamation, and harassment. Her confident veneer cracked as neighbors peeked from behind curtains, watching the self-proclaimed HOA president being told, in no uncertain terms, to leave the Matthews alone. One deputy even reminded her that there was no legal HOA authority over Emily's property. something the county records made crystal clear. Karen left that morning pale and shaken, binder clutched tightly to her chest. For the first time, she didn't shout back or issue threats. But Emily knew it wasn't over. People like Karen rarely back down completely. They just look for another angle. As the deputies drove off, Jacob exhaled in relief, thinking the nightmare was finally finished. But Emily stayed quiet. She'd seen enough stubbornness in her line of work to recognize when someone was plotting their next move, and somewhere down the street, Karen was already making phone calls.